53 days. This is for educational purposes. That's how long it took a certain failed painter from Austria to overthrow the German government after he got elected through democratic means. The speed of that turnaround is something to behold, and I would recommend everybody to go ahead and check out an article in The Atlantic that was written by Timothy Rybach about how Hitler had transformed Germany from a constitutional democracy to a dictatorship. One of the interesting things to think about when you're reading or listening to that article is how every pillar of democracy was inverted in order to centralize power into his hands. And that was really a key lesson to think about as we head into the next 4 years. What is particularly interesting is the language that is being used by the incoming Trump administration and how they describe their first 90 days. They are calling it an exercise in shock and awe. And one of the parallels between what is presumably heading our way through the Trump administration and what the guy with the funny mustache was able to pull off is the similarities in the exercises that they've used. Now, we all know that Trump is not someone who is fond of reading, but we also know that he is very knowledgeable about Hitler's signature work, Mein Kampf. And what's interesting about Hitler is that he demonstrated a unique skill in his political career to identify the weak spots in democratic institutions and invert them to his will. He spent a decade in opposition politics, and he knew firsthand how he could manipulate those that are aligned with him and either neutralize them or bring them over to his side. He had been co-opting and crushing right-wing opposition and competitors throughout his entire career, and that helped set the stage for what he was able to pull off in a mere 53 days. Who does that sound like? What's happened from 2014 until today? What have we seen the Republican Party turn into? All of those people who were never Trumpers, where are they now? How many never Trumpers are really there? And let's not ignore the very real possibility that there is an ocean of compromise that is being leveraged against those Republicans to bring them into line. This again parallels what Hitler was able to do during his rise to power. When you think about the results of the November election, there are some pretty strong parallels between how that election is being framed and what Hitler did after he won in 1933. You see both Trump and Hitler calling their victories massive wins, a clear mandate. Hitler was even quoted as saying that Germans were rejoicing in the streets at his election. His victory was 37% of the electorate. And when confronted about it, he would often say, even though he won just a minority position, his argument would be that I have a majority of the minority that gives me a mandate. And what's interesting about that line of thinking is that he recognized that he could not push these things through all on his own. One of the things that he pushed for from the time he got elected was the Enabling Act. And this empowering law or this enabling act basically allowed whoever was in control to rule by decree and bypass the legislature. And if that sounds familiar, Trump has echoed those same sentiments. So part of the first things that Hitler did when he took over was push for that so that he could get that law passed and he could wield absolute power. I would be keeping my eyes open for a similar move when this administration takes hold. I would highly recommend that you check out that entire article because there are so many parallels between what Trump has already done and what Hitler historically did that it's almost a carbon copy playbook. Think about the things that Hitler ran on. Hitler ran on reviving the economy, reducing unemployment, increasing military spending, withdrawal from international obligations, purging the country of foreigners who were poisoning the blood of the nation, and exacting revenge on political opponents. Who does that sound like? What speeches have we heard where those exact same things were said? And when you look back into history, one of the main drivers that Hitler would often talk about was draining the parliamentarian swamp, massive tariffs on imports. These are all things straight out of the playbook of Hitler that Trump is putting into place. One of the other things that's interesting about the rapid rise to power and the consolidation of power after the 1933 election was what Hitler did to his political opposition. He banned the communists, which effectively eliminated one segment of the legislature from actually holding seats. That positioned his party to gain more control. In addition to doing that, Hitler appointed key people in various positions across his key leadership to amp up the violence in the streets and suppress any of his opposition votes. And the thing that finally tipped the balance into his favor was the engineered Reichstag fire. And when the Reichstag fire happened, obviously Hitler's party blamed the communists and the socialists and everybody else, and those same people blamed Hitler's party. And it ended up that the fire was the catalyst for one of the biggest turnouts in German history and helped Hitler continue his rise of power and consolidate it even more. When you look at all of these different things that happened, it becomes clear that there is a playbook that is being run currently. And what that means is that from day one, we need to be approaching this with our eyes wide open and our intent to fight back as hard and as fast as we possibly can. This is not a situation when you look at the things that Trump has talked about wanting to do. This is not a situation where we can sit back and see how things play out, because before long, it'll be too late to react. And then we're in for a different kind of fight.